just wanted to take a look at the rule breach process for leagues. This is something which I'd had on my kind of work project for the 2020-21 season. And reason we identified that we wanted to kind of share this kind of a session over the course of the season was that over the course of the last 3 years or so, we've had several club appeals about league decisions which have come through to us at the county, where we've picked up that there have been some issues around the charging process from the league. Now, in some instances, that has actually led to the decision being overturned, and additionally for costs being charged against the league for failing to follow the correct process. So I wanted to try and run through the process in detail with all the leagues this evening, just to try and make sure that we kind of avoid those situations happening again in the future. You may recognise that some of it is similar to sessions we've done in the past with Marchives, but I wanted to kind of go into this in slightly more detail than we've covered in the past. I've also put together a packet of resources for leagues, which will be shared after the meeting, and I'll kind of refer to as we go. Thank you to everybody that registered and also that filled in the online form highlighting which areas you wanted covered. Hopefully I will cover everything this evening, but of course, as we go through, please feel free to give me a shout, put your hands up or pop something in the chat, and I'll try and address any questions you may have as we go. So there's 4 main areas that I'm going to cover this evening. And obviously you may imagine the bulk of it will be in that first section, just around the rule breach regulations, difficult tongue twister late on a Monday, and the process for charging clubs. This was one key topic that then came out in the registrations, which was sort of around non-payment of fines and what action as a league you can take. Debt recovery, with apologies, and I'll kind of explain why that's with an apology when we get to it. And then I'm not going to go through the league appeal process in detail. That has been done on other sessions, but if you would like me to, I'm more than happy to run another kind of session on that. But within itself, it's probably a 30-minute session or so. But I will just kind of look at the impact of kind of failing to follow the correct charging process on league appeals, and what some of the potential ramifications could be, particularly going forward after this kind of a session, if a decision does get appealed to the county FA. Just want to also cover before we get going that any reference in this to league refers to standalone cup competitions as well as the competition organiser. Equally applies to the county FA in our role as county cup organisers. But just for want of clarification or ease of reference, it may well be competition, may well be league, but as I go through it all means the same thing. It's the competition or the league organisers. Going to start off just with a recap, and apologise that you will have seen this before, but I think it does always bear just review and repeating, which is kind of the underlying principles in the FA's disciplinary processes. So chief among them, and there's a reason why it's at the top of the wheel, is around fairness. And it is trying to ensure that there is fairness to all parties in everything we do across the disciplinary process. So certainly we strive to make sure that our procedures and sanctions are fair on both the alleged victim and the alleged perpetrator when it comes to a county FA misconduct charge or disciplinary process. And that way we can ensure that hopefully a fair and correct decision is made. Certainly consistency really feeds into the fairness aspect. And from a league point of view, in the same way as with the county, there should try to be a consistency in how you tackle the rule breaches. Now, that doesn't mean to say that every single case has to be treated exactly the same way without any consideration for the individual circumstances around every case. So the best way that I would probably describe that from a county FA point of view is that there are certain misconduct charges which are based on statements of fact that the fairness in the process comes from the fact that we will raise a charge, let's say, against every club that plays a player while under suspension. However, by having proportionate and appropriate sanctions to the individual case, we ensure there's also fairness to the alleged perpetrator in that we've taken the circumstances into consideration. However, it wouldn't be right for us not to charge in some circumstances and charge in others, because that doesn't allow for the fairness. It's only when it goes to that individual judicial or adjudicatory body that you can get that kind of deviation as part of that judicial process. As always, education program is possibly less relevant perhaps to leagues, but as part of the overall disciplinary scope, sessions such as this very much feeds into that, and trying to make sure that there's transparency and awareness across the entire football community as to how our procedures work, what kind of processes we go through, what kind of sanctions we impose, means that everyone's more aware, they understand the consequences of their actions, or potential consequences if they do breach rules. So certainly from a league point of view, I'd encourage, by education program, that means making sure that clubs are aware of what the key rule breaches are, the really common ones, the playing ineligible players or failing to fulfill a fixture, and what the potential consequences of those may be. So those are the underlying principles we'll kind of cover off as we go through, but I think they are always useful to have in the front of your mind as we kind of discuss judicial processes. So I'm going to go through kind of an overview of the rule breach process. Now, I put in the invitation email that went out last week that really this all kind of relates to only a very few specific rules within the standard code. And the rule breach process is set out pretty explicitly within SCORE and SCORE Rule 6D. So I'm going to kind of try and break that down into what that means in practice. But I'm not, for once, just hopefully going to quote and cite regulations at you, because I appreciate when you start looking at some of the language in there, it gets a bit convoluted. So I've got it broken down into, hopefully, a slightly easier flowchart. So the first step in this is that obviously a breach of or a potential rule breach will be made aware to the competition committee. Now that may be through something that one club's informed you that the opposition's played an ineligible player, or it may be that you're aware through the referee that the team's failed to play and failed to fulfill the fixture, or it may well be a situation where you determine that a club has been consistently failing to fulfill its administrative duties, and therefore you believe that that's constituted a breach. So the first part, same as the county FA, we have to investigate any misconduct accusation that comes into us. There needs to be a cursory or a kind of investigation just to confirm the facts. Now, the vast majority of rule breaches for leagues, hopefully, will be statements of fact, effectively. A fixture did or did not go ahead. A player who was ineligible did or did not play. So in the first part, you're trying to confirm the facts to say, has a breach occurred? Now, the league must take action within 28 days of being notified. Now, for those of you who are kind of aware around our misconduct process and around the county FA having a requirement to conclude disciplinary processes around playing under suspension or abandon fixtures within 28 days, the league's 28 days effectively kicks in at the conclusion of the county FA process. If it's not something that goes to the county FA, it would be 28 days from the notification of the breach. And when we say must take action, I would suggest that means you need to have raised the charge. I don't think it necessarily means you need to have concluded the entire process, because I appreciate sometimes with giving clubs enough time to respond or having enough time to set up a committee meeting to consider a charge, that may extend beyond that 28 days. But certainly there's a question of integrity to the competition that means that we want to make sure the process is quick. So certainly within 28 days, the league or the competition should have issued a charge against a club for that potential rule breach. Now, this charge must be a formal and written charge. It is something that has to get served on the club. Again, very similar to the way that our formal misconduct charges come out through the whole game system or through the post, and there is a formal charge sheet and letter that goes through to the club. The club is then given 7 days to respond to that. and they can deny the charge. So admit that, yes, they have breached the rule, or deny that they've breached a rule. And they have the option to either submit written response, so additional either evidence or a written response to the charge that's considered, quote, under correspondence, or they have the right and the choice, if they wish, to request a hearing in front of the management committee. And I'll go into what that would look like in a little bit more detail shortly. The third process would be that the charge is then considered by the committee, whether on papers or in person, and a decision made on the outcome. Is it proven or not proven that they have breached that rule? And then what is an appropriate tariff? Now, that sanction should always reference the fines tariff if there is going to be a fine. And as I said, it kind of needs to be proportionate to the level of offence. And again, I'll come into that in a little bit more detail shortly. The club will then have 14 days to submit the appeal to the county FA, and that is from the written notification of the result. So if a committee meets on a Friday, but the secretary doesn't send the notification out until, let's say, the following Monday, that 14-day will kick in from the Monday at the point that they've received the written notification. It's worth noting that if a club does appeal, the clock would stop on any kind of fines tariff or fine that's been issued, so that would only the timer on that would only restart at the point that the appeal has been considered. It's not appropriate that if a club fails to make payment within 14 days because they've submitted an appeal challenging the result, that they should then get dinged with an additional fine because it's still an active case. So I'm going to go into a couple of those areas just in a slight bit of more detail and share with you some of the resources that we've got available. So as I said, a rule breach has to be charged with a formal written charge that's served on the club. And effectively, the club needs to know what it is that they're accused of breaching with a rule reference and probably a description. And ideally, either what fixture it relates to and potentially what player or what incident within that fixture it may relate to. So what I have done, and this is sharing some stuff that's come through from the FA that I've kind of updated and tweaked, is we have put together some template letters for leagues, which will get sent out after this this session this evening. It's not a requirement for you to use these by any means. And I know there's a lot of leagues that have really strong correspondence and templates that they already use, so this shouldn't be seen as mandatory if you have your own procedures or your own kind of letter in place. However, we would expect a charge letter to contain these. So if you're not currently using something that has this level of detail, by all means, please feel free to adapt this to your own league and to adopt it. I'd recommend that each rule breach is assigned a reference number. That will help you when tracking it and help the club if they're referring to it as the process continues. And as I said, it should contain a reference to the league rule, so the reference number plus potentially the title. And I've just realised I'm on the wrong letter here, so let me just go to the right one. Sorry about that. There we go. No. Here's the charge letter. Notice of charge. So club is hereby charged under the provision of the league rules as follows. Charge reference number, details of the fixture, so the team, the fixture details and the date of the offence, and then the league rule it is that they're alleged to have broken. If it does relate to perhaps playing an ineligible player, I'd recommend again including a bit more information around that so that it is explicit, the name of the ineligible player and the reason for the player's ineligibility. So let's say we're just saying that it's a player that hasn't completed the registration process, or it's a player that's under suspension, or it's a player that has played too many games at a higher level and therefore has breached whichever rule that is. So it just kind of gives a little bit more detail so that the club know when they receive that charge, what it is that they're alleged to have done. Gives them the option then to select how they wish to respond and a deadline, and it gives them a bit more information about next. So if they will be asked to attend a meeting or not, and potentially how much time you'll give them before notification of any specific meeting. Also states, and this is a key one, which is that if they do not respond by the deadline, then the management committee has the opportunity just to deal with the matter based on the evidence they already have available. and that when they do return any response to the charge, they must include any evidence that they want considered at that time. And as I said, regardless of whether you adopt the County FA's template or you have your own template, you must make sure that the club are given the opportunity to respond and represent themselves in person if they wish. Once a response comes in from the club, the direction from under league rules would be to proceed as soon as reasonably practicable. I'm not sure it is actually a word, but it just means we want to make sure that everything moves through the cycle quickly. What we absolutely do not want is clubs charged at the beginning of the season and the matter not heard until the end of the season, particularly if it could have an impact on the final standings in the league. As I'm sure you appreciate from when the County FA's taken our time in dealing with some of the disciplinary procedures, from clubs' point of view, they want to make sure that they know where they stand as quickly as possible, particularly if it does impact the league table and could impact how they play and how they kind of approach future fixtures. So the club responses, as I said, they can accept the charge and request it be dealt with on the papers. So they're still allowed to submit any formal letter that they wish to in response to the charge, detailing any mitigating factors that they may want considered, and an explanation as to why they or how they may have breached that rule. Equally, if they prefer, they should still have the right, they must still have the right to request the opportunity to present their mitigation in person before the management committee. Equally, they have the same opportunities if they deny the charge, that they can submit paperwork rather than attend a meeting, or they can attend a meeting if they wish to deny the case in person. Eagle-eyed of you will notice those are exactly the same responses you get to a misconduct charge, and that's why we're really trying to encourage that that process should mirror the County FA's disciplinary process as much as possible. The final option is when there is no response, and again the guidance under Standard Code is that the management committee determines the charge in such manner and upon such evidence as it considers appropriate. Now, what I would suggest that tends to mean, in the same way that if we don't get a response to a misconduct charge at the County FA level, you've got to determine, based on the evidence that's been provided from that initial investigation, do you believe that that is first proven or not proven, and then consider the sanction after. It is always worth still testing that evidence and critiquing it, just to make sure that you are reaching the correct and fair decision. If you do get a case which goes before a disciplinary panel, and this actually, I would say this applies whether it's in person or it's the panel that's considering it based on the paperwork and correspondence, the same kind of principles would apply through this. The first is you have to make sure you abide by the conflict of interest principle. So if any member of the management committee has a stake in the outcome of the case, so whether that is, obviously they certainly wouldn't be considering if they were part of the club that's been charged, shouldn't be considering if they're part of the club that was the opposition on the day and may therefore stand to gain points depending on the outcome of it. But you may also consider that actually it wouldn't be appropriate for a management committee member who has a team potentially in the same division to consider that, because again there is that perceived interest that actually they stand to potentially gain or lose something depending on the outcome of the case, particularly where points are available in adult football. Hearings, and particularly hearings in person, are inquisitorial, they're not adversarial. So it shouldn't be a confrontational environment, and it's not a case that the league are prosecuting the club and it's not like we're not in a courtroom drama. It's not it's not a TV show. It's not a John Grisham novel. It's not a case where you're throwing accusations and really trying to grill somebody and put them under pressure. It's a case of trying to understand the facts of the case. Chances are, particularly if it's something around, let's say, an ineligible player, And if it has been denied or it has been contested, that if you weren't there at the game, you need to establish first of all whether that player played or not. And it's a case of trying to build up an understanding of an incident that you weren't at. So it should be through a thorough questioning, but a fair questioning of the individuals. Effectively, the league would present their evidence first. That's anything that's been gained in that first investigation stage. And the club would be allowed to respond and present their case or their arguments against that evidence that's been provided. And the responsibility of the management committee, as I said, is to ask questions and make an informed decision. As I said, hopefully, for the vast majority of cases of a rule breach, it shouldn't be too contested in terms of the basic facts of the matter. Did the match go ahead or not? Did the player play or not? Was the match abandoned or not? The nuances are going to come into any mitigating factors around responsibility or around what clubs players may have been aware of at the time. So that's where that kind of probing questioning and just trying to establish the facts of the case comes in. For the slightly more complicated cases, particularly where, let's say, a league may have chosen to charge a club with failing to complete league administration appropriately, again, I would want to see the league avoiding, quote, prosecuting or really challenging the club constantly. But again, you should be compiling your evidence in advance and being able to present them with, hard evidence and paperwork to show that they failed consistently to respond to emails or to provide information when required. I can see we've got a question. Terry, if you just want to unmute yourself, you're more than welcome to jump in.
Yes, my question on that is with regards to the questions process. So we had an appeal quite recently where we went to ask questions around the charge, but we were told that the questions weren't appropriate questions for the appeal because they weren't relating directly to the charge given against a particular individual.
Okay.
So what deems as an appropriate question at these hearings?
It does need, generally, if it is relating to a specific incident, then the question should be around that incident. If you're looking at a specific match that a player may or may not have played in whilst they were under suspension, whether they played in a match, 2 months previously and committed something they may have done 2 months previously wouldn't be deemed relevant in that kind of case. Certainly, when you get into some of those more. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So the charge was against a coach who was red carded for improper conduct, so the appeal was based on the grounds of it was dissent as opposed to improper conduct. Okay. So the question that he asked was what part of the offence made it improper conduct as opposed to dissent, and the question was dismissed. So I apologise if that was a bit too specific or inappropriate for this, but it's just more wanted to.
Yeah, I'll probably have a chat with you about that one separately, Terry, just because that's going much more into misconduct. But certainly when it comes to kind of the rule breach side of things, you would want to be looking at the specific match in question.
Yeah.
Certainly, let's say it was trying to determine which team caused if either or both teams at fault for an abandonment. You're kind of looking at the incident that led the match to get abandoned, and it's then slightly irrelevant whether the left back picked up a yellow card in the 3rd minute and the right back picked up a yellow card in the 5th minute, right, when there was a mass brawl in the 79th minute that led to it to be abandoned. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I can see another question has just popped in. Can score be altered mid-season? First of all, score itself is only managed by the FA, so the mandatory standard code is altered once a year and then issued in the summer to take effect the following season. Localized league rules can obviously be added in addition to score, but if a new rule is brought in mid-season, it can only take effect from the following season. There was only one exception I can think of, which the FA's kind of agreed to, which was related to mini soccer, where you had tournament events, and they agreed that because each tournament event is its own competition, you could bring in a new rule for later tournament events that year. Hope that explains that one, Danny. So I'm just going to pick up around potential sanctions then for rule breaches. As I said before, all sanctions should reference the fines tariff, which are penalties which have been agreed by league members as appropriate sanctions for that type of offence. One thing I would say about this, as came up a couple of seasons ago, is that the fines tariff is a maximum penalty. It will always say up to X amount. So it's important to consider it as a bit of a sliding scale. The question that came up a couple of seasons ago was that the same club had effectively breached the same rule 5 or 6 times over the course of a season, and the league wanted to know, was there any further penalty that they could issue? Obviously, they can't, because the fines tariff is a hard and fast rule that's agreed by the league members and is the maximum penalty given. So you may want to consider, when you are looking at individual cases, whether you want to leave yourself room to increase that should there be further breaches of the same rule by the same club during that season. This is also where you can consider that mitigation. Certainly things around playing ineligible players, if you can really highlight that actually the club weren't fully aware of the length of suspension, or there had been an issue around the registration. Let's say that the club had submitted everything on whole game system, but the system had crashed and it hadn't gone through to the league and they played them anyway. And you take that at face value and you're prepared to accept the club's mitigation, you may want to mitigate that fine down away from the maximum level on the rule breach. Certainly, I don't think that you're going to face too many issues finding someone less than the maximum, but you will face issues if you find someone over and above the agreed maximum in your fine tariff. Just as clarification, the maximum fine for adult clubs is £250, and for youth clubs it's £100. So again, you want to make sure that any financial penalties imposed are proportionate to the offence, and it is always worth remembering that no individual under the age of 18 can be fined. As the league, you need to confirm the results in writing as soon as possible, but in all cases, again, under Score and Scory, that has to be within 7 days of decision. And as I said, at that point, the 14-day appeal process kicks in. I'm going to see if I can get the correct letter up this time. So again, we have a template for you, which will go out after the meeting, which just looks at a template for a sample results letter. And again, it's very much, you'll see the same details as was in the charge letter, again, referencing an internal charge number, the details surrounding the charge, and then providing the result at the bottom, proven or not proven, and then the outcome of the case with any penalties, such as if you're deducting points, if you're reversing the fixture, if you're awarding the game, or if you're issuing any financial penalties. This standard template then has details around the appeal process, including deadlines and appeal fees, bit of information around that, and what the appeal process looks like. Now, I have it as a separate letter, but you may well feel it's better to combine them, which is then having a letter just explicitly referencing any financial implications or impact of a sanction, and providing the account details and payment details. I've got this as a separate letter because I'm conscious some leagues will probably have their own invoicing systems already. You may well use, Xero or one of those online invoice platforms or accounting platforms, or you may just decide it's easier to roll any of the payment details into the results letter. Anyways, fine, but the important thing is it's very clear to clubs that they're aware of the financial impact of any rule breach and the payment terms, and then the appeal process. As with all things, there are a few exceptions to the rule, and so for the following offences, you can issue a sanction immediately. Any breach of Rule 6I, which is non-payment of fines, which I will come on to shortly, because I'm conscious that's a very big sticking point. And then 8H and 9, which is failure to attend an AGM or a special general meeting. You don't need to go down a charging process for those. You can go immediately past Go, collect your £200 and go straight to the charging process. Don't collect £200, it's a monopoly joke. But yeah, you can go straight to the issuing any kind of sanctions in accordance with your league rules for those breaches. Before I get into the non-payment of fines situation, I just wanted to touch on withdrawing registrations, and this is cancelling or rejecting registrations of players. Now, those of you who have been through this process before or have heard me rant about these at other meetings will know it is possibly the worst worded rule in SCORE. It is clear as mud, so I'm going to try and break it down as best certainly as I can understand it. So the reference is SCORE and SCORE 18G3, and it is effectively where you believe a player has either brought the competition into disrepute or has committed, quote, undesirable conduct. Now, there is a very strict definition of what constitutes undesirable conduct in the definition of this rule, and that is where an individual has committed repeat proven misconduct which has led to suspensions in excess of 112 days or 10 matches. Now, each one of those words is actually crucial. It must be repeat, so it needs to be more than one offence. They must be proven misconduct charges, and they must be misconduct charges, so not red cards. They have to be county FA misconduct charges. This means that, and this is why I appreciate it's frustrating for leagues, and I do fully understand this, that where one player maybe commits a serious act of misconduct at the beginning of the season, for example, commits physical contact on a match official and gets a 182-day suspension. If that is a one-off incident, then they're not eligible for this rule. It is only once you get to a track record of disciplinary incidents above and beyond a red card that the league can consider withdrawing a registration. Appreciate a lot of the time you may not be aware of an individual's disciplinary record. So if you are concerned about a specific player, then please come to us and we can confirm their disciplinary history with you. And I'm happy to stick my neck out and confirm if they do meet the threshold for this or not. That doesn't mean that you can go straight to the charge being found proven and immediately cancel the registration. We will only tell you if they meet the criteria for the charge or for that definition of undesirable conduct or not. It then becomes the league decision whether to proceed further beyond that. And this is why I wanted to bring it up tonight. That player must still be charged under the rule breach process. It wasn't one of those three exceptions I listed on the previous slide. So in this instance, you would charge the player through the club, either with holding their registration or the ones to register them. You would charge them with undesirable conduct. Again, they would have that opportunity to accept or deny the charge. And again, they have the opportunity to request a personal hearing with the league committee if they wish. Only at that point can you make a decision to cancel or refuse their registration. And any decision around that must be time limited. We're no longer able to give permanent lifetime bans from football, and leagues are no longer able to say it's a lifetime ban from participating in the league. There's no real definition of what an appropriate time length limit is from the FA. But again, I'd kind of look at where the FA's sanction guidelines sit for the more serious offences. So for a serious assault on a match official, you're looking at a mid-level severity. I'd guess you'd be looking between 5 and 10 years misconduct suspension. So again, that's probably where you would want to pitch any kind of time limit on refusing a registration of a player. That decision is appealable, so the player can come to us and say, we don't believe this is fair. And one of our panels could say, we agree with the player that the league should allow their registration. We may say, no, the league's bang on, they're completely within their rights, they follow the correct process. Or they may say, leagues follow the correct process, but actually a 20-year suspension seems a bit excessive. We'll reduce it to 10 years, at which point you'll be able to apply for registration with the league again. Once that time-limited withdrawal of their registration or refusal of their registration expires, the player is then placed on probation for 12 months, during which time, if they commit any further acts of misconduct, which get proven by the County FA, you can recharge them effectively under this process again with undesirable conduct, and you can reissue a new suspension against them. Appreciate that puts that's difficult for leagues to take, and I know because I've had conversations with a lot of you over the last few years around this, because I appreciate the efforts that you go to and the desire to protect your players and your clubs and to avoid the bad apples or the people that are persistently committing serious acts of misconduct from participating. And it's not necessarily because you a wish to exclude, but it's a wish to protect. That these kind of regulations and principles have gone through the FA and through the legal advice that they have at Wembley, and is seen as kind of, again, proportionate and appropriate sanctions for the level of offence. As with anything, if you ever have any questions on this, please come to me. I'm more than happy to kind of talk you through that process in more detail on a case-by-case basis. Going to come on now to the non-payment process. So league has issued a charge, clubs responded, it's gone to the committee, it's been found proven, and a financial penalty has been issued. As I said before, the club get issued a fine for a rule breach and they're given 14 days to make payment. Now, if after 14 days the club fail to make payment, they are fined again under SCORE or SCORE Rule 6I. Now, this is one of those ones with an exception, so no further charge is necessary. You can proceed straight to the charge. You may have guessed by now, we have template letters for that. So again, this will go out after this meeting. We've got a template letter that says to the club, you've been charged, it's been found proven, you were fined this, you had a due date of X, payment has not been made in terms with that, you're now being issued with a late fee, here's the total you now owe, and here's the due date for this total amount. Again, very explicit, very clear for clubs to understand. And again, it shows them the consequences if they fail to meet that. Which is that if payment is not made by the deadline listed, the league is within their rights and effectively should be encouraged to withdraw that team's fixtures until payment has been made. Now, it can either be for that specific team or it could be with all teams within the competition associated with the club. That's one area where it is up to the league's discretion to some extent. Again, gives payment details. So it's something very clear that goes out to clubs, means that they are fully aware of the consequences of their actions or of their inaction. If after that they still haven't paid, you've withdrawn the fixtures and they're still not paying up, that's when it starts to get a little bit trickier. At that stage, under regulations, the next step is, as a final resort, the league can consider calling an SGM and recommending that the club or the team is expelled from the league under the under SCORE and SCORE 12A or B. However, before you get to that, that's the nuclear option. What we would really urge and request is that the league engage us and try and effectively set up a three-way conversation between the league, the county, and the club to try and understand what the problem is. We're more than happy to help facilitate any kind of conversations, witness any agreement or payment plan that may get put in place by the club and the league, that we can, and follow up on any kind of agreement that's reached. And we will also then go in and offer support to the club with their internal administration, because it doesn't help us as the county FA to be losing teams effectively because of poor administration, because they can't get their fines in order, they can't get their, if a team's been fined repeatedly for failing to provide a team sheet, they missed the payment, we don't want to see a club, we don't want to lose an entire team's worth of players because the manager keeps forgetting to hand in a team sheet. So we're happy to kind of join in those conversations, see if we can help find solutions around supporting the club with their internal administration, potentially around payment plans if they're also picking up a lot of disciplinary fines from the county FA, and work with both parties. Of course, if that doesn't work and they refuse to engage and effectively just walk away, that's the point that you would probably look to call a special general meeting to recommend that the club or the team is expelled from the league. As I said, please use that as the last resort, and probably only where there's kind of repeat instances of this. I'd love to think that 99% or about 50 to 70% of the time, as soon as they get a late fee, they make sure they pay it. And you know what? If you suddenly then threaten to withdraw the fixtures that weekend, or do withdraw the fixtures for one weekend, really hope that 99% of the time then you'll get the payment pretty promptly. So the other aspect of that then becomes debt recovery, which is the slightly more formal process. And this is where I said at the very beginning when I put up the agenda, it was debt recovery with an apology. And that is because from next season, subject to FA Council approval, debt recovery can only be used for county FA disciplinary fees or where clubs basically exit the league. So leagues would not be able to take debt recovery action against a club that remains in membership of them. Now, the reason for that is because there are structures in place within the league, the rules, which hopefully avoid having to get to debt recovery. And that is where, again, you fall back on Rule 6I, fining them for non-payment of fees after 2 weeks, and then withholding fixtures when it's been another 2 weeks without payment. By following that, like I said, 99% of the time, fingers crossed, you'll never get to the point where you would have to take debt recovery against a club. The other thing that you can do, and you may want to look into, and this is where, again, local league rules may apply, which is around permission for clubs to enter either additional teams or to enter teams into league cup competitions outside the regular league structure. I say it depends on the league rules because obviously league cups aren't included in standard code, so it's up to each competition to kind of structure that and to set the entry criteria as they deem fit. But if any entry into that is at the committee's discretion, then you may say that actually if a club is persistently failing in their team administration or persistently picking up fines like this, you're regularly withholding fixtures from them because they're failing to make payments on time. You may say actually as a penalty to a charge for failing to complete league administration that you are going to refuse their entry into a League Cup competition for 1 or 2 seasons. It is something that's not really catered for in the league rule in standard code, so it's gone a little bit off piece, but it is one where hopefully you may see some results that, and it's one extra step you can go down before that nuclear option of fully removing a club from the league. Richard, I can see your hands up if you want to jump on.
Yeah, one big issue we've had over the years, and a lot of other people have, is when you get a situation with players who incur county FA disciplinary fines, yeah, they go right to the end of the season, they don't pay the club, and
oh, have I lost you, Richard? Oh, there we go.
I mean, you can hear me.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You've got a situation where players pick up disciplinary fines playing for one club, and they don't pay up. By the end of the season, they're still outstanding. They then go to another club at the start of the next season. Yes. How do you get that money back? You can't, can you?
So the club that they have played for the previous season can take debt recovery action against them if it's debts that haven't been paid, they've been incurred within the last 112 days and haven't been paid within 28 days of asking. And
right.
One of the things I put together, which I'm going to launch early next year, is we put together a financial package for clubs, or a financial structure, sorry, for clubs around how to manage disciplinary fines for players. It's very similar to this. It's trying to give them a bit of a timeline of all the different options available to them. It's stuff that's not in part of the FA regulations. It's kind of a best practice model that we've put together that
Right.
again at giving players 1 or 2 weeks ability to make payment. If they don't do that, you look at sitting them on the bench until they make payment, or potentially removing them as a member of the club for persistent non-payment of fines. Okay. Anything else on that, Richard? Does that help?
No, fine. Thanks, Alistair.
Okay, no problems. Going to come through then onto the appeals. Now, as I said, I'm not going to go through the appeal process as such, but just kind of the impact that failing to follow the rule breach process can have on appeals that come to the county FA. So any decision of the management committee can be appealed. So therefore, any of the decisions around rule breaches and the outcomes of them can be appealed by the club that you find has committed a breach. Now, the appeal ball, we've got a responsibility, as we said, harping right back to the very beginning of that wheel that we put up, responsibility to fairness, and we've got a responsibility as well to the integrity of the competition. So what I mean by that is that generally, and this is where we've tried to make sure for appeals for the last 3 seasons or so, we've put detailed written reasons together explaining the decisions of the appeal boards, so that we can actually, within Berks and Bucks FA, ensure that we've got consistency in the outcomes of appeals and the kind of decisions that are taken. So we've got a responsibility to the integrity of the competition. So that means that if a club has clearly committed a sporting offence, but the league hasn't followed the correct charging process, then you may say it's appropriate that actually the club should still face that sporting sanction. Clear one I'm thinking here is where they played somebody under suspension. League rules very clear. Place someone under suspension, you can overturn the result. If a league's done that without going through the formal charge process, yes, the league's at fault, but the club have also been at fault in the sporting manner if they played a player they shouldn't have done. So in those kinds of situations, what appeal boards have done over the last few seasons is they will retain the sporting sanction, but any financial penalties may be overturned because the league shouldn't be benefiting financially when they fail to follow the correct process. Equally, if it relates to an administrative breach, the appeal board may well rule against the league for failing to fulfill its own administrative duties. It's unfair to, fine a club for failing to do good administration if the league have also failed to do good administration. And in any instance, the league can still and have quite often had to bear the costs of the appeal. So even if we've said that the sporting sanction should remain because it's a clear breach, if the leagues fail to follow the due process, then there's a way of showing that they're culpable and of penalising the league for failing to follow the fair process is that they may then have to bear those costs of the appeal. So as you can see, there are a County FA Appeal Board does have the ability to impose sanctions against the league when they fail to follow this correct process. Now, I don't want that to happen. Obviously, as you're aware, I'm in a slightly tweaked role in this season where it's a lot more engagement, a lot more kind of governance inside and support for leagues. So I want to make sure that as league management committees that A, in the interest of fairness on clubs, the correct process is being followed, but B, that you aren't being penalised for not understanding or not following the procedures correctly. However, as I said, if a county FA appeal board does determine the leagues fail to follow the correct process, there could be a financial consequence if it comes through to us at the county FA. Just going to kind of pick up on a couple of other advice in general to help the appeal breach process move as swiftly and as easily as possible. The first is, hopefully you're aware that the County FA must consider any misconduct charges relating to abandoned games or playing under suspension within 28 days of the fixture. So this is just a reminder again and a plea really that if you are made aware of a fixture that's been abandoned, to please get in touch with us to make sure we're also aware of it. I would far rather have 5 or 6 emails a week saying, "Are you aware this match has been abandoned? Yes, thank you very much. We'll let you know once if we need any more information." Far rather be doing that 6 times a week than suddenly getting an email. "Were you aware this match 3 weeks ago was abandoned? What's the outcome? We need to consider it." Because then we're in a real bind where we're up against the wall to try and, fast track our disciplinary processes, which means that we may end up making mistakes and not giving people a fair hearing because we will miss something. So please, if you're aware of suspension of abandoned matches or playing under suspension, please get in touch with us and make sure we're aware as quickly as possible. The other thing in all of these, in terms of best practice, it's not a requirement, but it's something we would actively encourage, which is that if you find that you're not getting a response from a club, either to a charge for a rule breach or whether you've issued a fine and they haven't made payment within the 14 days, best practice will always be to try and send a reminder and chase up on them. So for rule breach charges, clubs got 7 days to respond. So you may consider after 4 days or so, quick email. Just want to make sure you receive the charge okay. And remind you, you've got to respond to it by Monday or whatever the date may be. Equally with fines, if it's been 7 days and you haven't received payment, then just send a reminder. "Hi John, just remind you that this payment's due in 7 days. Please can you make sure it's done? Otherwise the club will incur a late fee." We have the glorious benefit that those reminders are kind of sent out automatically for us through the whole game system. But certainly it will garner you good graces from the club to make sure that, okay, you may have taken action, but you're trying to avoid them getting into any more administrative charges, which, let's face it, are really unnecessary from a club's point of view. And the final bit just kind of refers back to the point I made earlier around those persistent offenders, or where you do have concerns and you may be considering taking action at club and recommending their removal from the competition. And that is to try and engage with clubs as early as possible, as soon as you start picking up on these trends. Meet with those persistent offenders, engage with the county FA, bring us in on some of those conversations so that we can help support and, as I say, play that role of giving a club a kick up the backside, but also trying to give them a helping hand to make sure that they don't face those issues in the future. So lean on us for any support you need. We're trying to encourage this with clubs as well, if they've got any concerns with managers or if they're with their relationships with leagues, to actually engage us in and use us as much as you possibly can. As I said before, we don't want to lose anyone from football, and it's in our best interest to make sure that these kinds of issues are resolved so that the teams and the clubs and the players keep playing, rather than risk losing them because of what eventually comes down to 9 times out of 10 just poor administration, and where someone hasn't made payment on time or keeps forgetting to submit a team sheet or do something. That is it from me. I'm happy to take any questions you may have about the rule breach, or I know that there are a couple of people that had a couple of questions and wanted to stay on the line, but I can also see a couple of questions coming into the chat, so I'm just going to swap over to that screen and see if I can answer the ones. I can see a couple of hands up, so I will try and deal with the ones in the chat first, and then I'll come back to the people with the hands up. Can new rules be added to standard code? Yes, they can. I do have a template which I'm happy to send out as well with this one, just around proposals for changes to standard code. They go through to the FA around February time, I believe, because they end up getting considered quite early on in the year ahead of introduction in the summer. So Danny, if there's anything specific, drop me an email. I can kind of pick up that process with you and kind of talk that through. Under what circumstances can you deduct points from the league? Certainly around if they've played an ineligible player, or if they've, I was going to say if they caused the match to be abandoned, but points wouldn't have been awarded then. So generally it comes down to if they've played an ineligible player, you have the opportunity to deduct points from them. With the probability of the season being extended, can the final deadline date for player registrations be extended? I'm guessing that, Trevor, means within your own league rules. I I would say if the clubs agree to that, then I wouldn't object to that from a county FA point of view, because I think that's fair and practical. I just make sure you bear any consideration if that then has a knock-on impact on eligibility criteria for cup finals or other later stages of other competitions. Something like that. I think as long as the clubs are in agreement with it, I don't see why we should stand in the way and prevent that. I'm going to jump over to the other screen just to see who's got their hands up, and it gives it to. Oh, I've just put my own hands up. Sorry about that. Okay, I've got Richard at the top of that list. I don't know if that was still from earlier, Richard, or if it was a new question.
No.
No, that was okay. That wasn't something new. Okay, in that case, I will go down to Kelly Hawkins.
Hi, Alistair. I'm sure you know what I'm going to ask. Given that we have one club that has persistently breached the rules over the last 3 seasons, been charged well over £2,000, and have left it till the day before league matches to pay any fines. Where do we go from there? As you know, we've tried to engage with them. You tried to engage with them. Unfortunately, once we've got they had, 13 outstanding county charges until Friday of this week. They had outstanding charges with us. Everything's been paid. So they seem to think that they're back to normal, nothing matters. I will tell you, they've also got 3 charges from this week. And, it's just going around in circles. So what sort of thing do we do there?
So I think that's where the best advice I would give is that there is still it would still be a charge under that failure to fulfill the administration to the standards of the competition, or whatever the wording may be.
Sorry,
pardon?
They clearly don't pay their fines. So what's the point in adding another fine on?
So I would do the charge. They've got that opportunity to respond, but then it's in any penalty from that I would look to see what non-financial penalties may be available to you. And that's where I think if there are League Cup competitions which are by permission of the management, you may say you're going to prevent or refuse their entry into the League Cup for the next season. You could say
fair on the players.
What was that? Sorry?
Is that fair on the players? Because it isn't the team, it's certain individuals.
So you don't have the power to remove an individual from the club, or to prevent them being the ones responsible for the administration. I think by potentially preventing the team's entry into some of those auxiliary or additional competitions, you got to hope that will push that will start putting pressure bottom up from the players towards that individual. The other thing, like I said, is just we'll keep trying to engage them and trying to one day we'll get that 3-way conversation where we can try and sit down and see what the issue is around that administration and what other solutions we might be able to put in place.
Okay, expect my email tomorrow.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Cheers.
I just realised all of this has been said on a recorded one, so you can use it against me. Any decision on that would still be appealable, and it would still be down to a county FA appeal board to determine if that is an appropriate sanction.
Yeah.
But it is a sanction you may want to consider if you feel that you can justify why the leagues had to take non-financial a non-financial approach to it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Am I giving myself enough wiggle room there?
I'll let you.
Thanks. I've got Pat Hicks next.
Hello, Alistair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Pat.
It's around the management committees. I should think every other league is in the same position as ours. We don't have management meetings at the moment for obvious reasons. And the disciplinary side of it currently is being dealt by the 6 officers.
Okay.
Now, one of your earlier things was about anyone who wants a hearing can appear before the management committee.
Yes.
Well, that ain't going to happen, is it? Not this season. Well, not until March at the earliest.
So I will. Well, the best advice to do that would be to look at a forum like this to support an online hearing. We've helped out a couple of other leagues tail end of last season do something similar where we've effectively hosted the meeting through Microsoft Teams and everyone's called in. We can then actually leave and allow the panel to still meet and to invite the club to attend as in their own defence online. So I've also put together a proposal around whether we can try and support leagues either financially through that or administratively. So I'm happy to kind of pick that up as another offline that we can try and see what we can do to support that kind of process.
Okay, thanks for that. Just one other thing, going back to right at the beginning, and I know that you're never going to agree with the opinion of this league. It's rained assaults on referees.
Can I just say it's not necessarily that I will never agree with it. It's that it can't always be allowed under the regulations.
Well, the regulations, as far as I'm concerned, the regulation needs to change, because to give someone 2 opportunities to assault a referee, I mean, we've lost referees through violence on the pitch and that. And I mean, I should think generally amongst referees, they find that, I mean, certainly a couple of occasions where the players got 180 something days, and yeah, that's fine. But I've always believed that any league should have the right that if it's an assault on a referee, they should say, we don't want him playing in our league anymore. And I remember having a conversation. Who was the guy you mentioned earlier from the FA?
Mark Ives.
Mark Ives. I remember having a conversation with him a couple of years ago, and he explained the attitude of our league. And he said, yeah, well, leave that with us, because if you don't want them playing in your league, we don't want them playing in any league. But everything seems to have stood still.
Yeah, they adjusted it, but only marginally. It used to be that those repeat offences had to have been committed within the same league, and they removed that it could be repeat offences in any league. So they tweaked it, but not to the extent, certainly, that I know yourselves hoped. And I was surprised that it didn't go any further than it did. All I can say on that is I'm more than happy to pick that up again as a proposed amendment to standard code, and we can try and push that through again. There are new people in those kind of positions at the FA, so there may well be we can get a bit more of. If we try again, we may get a different result. Certainly, there's been a renewed focus and public attention on serious offences against match officials. So it may well be, if we try again, we may get a slightly better result on that.
Okay, thank you, Alistair.
No problem, Pat. And final hand up is Kevin Bavington.
Hi, Alistair. Thank you. Just follow on from Pat's thing. I'm a referee in Pat's league, so I know about that because I was actually assaulted 8 years ago in a game. So I know how the league wants to deal with it, and I agree with it as a referee, and I know my colleagues do. So from a referee's point of view, we do agree that anybody who assaults a referee should not ever play in that league again or even play football. So that's that one. But my question is regarding the maximum fine.
Yes.
With us, you might know I'm the EBFA. So we're a youth league with £100. I've got definitely this year one team I've charged with about 5 or 6 breaches from one game. Quite a serious number of breaches where they've caused problems on the game. County have dealt with it, but now we're dealing with it, where we will like bringing them into the league into disrepute. Is it a maximum of 100 for each breach, or is it maximum for 100 for the whole lot?
It is a maximum of 100 for each breach. As long as they're charged, they are charged as separate offences.
Yeah. So when I sent the charge out, I listed each charge saying you breached this rule here, you breached this rule.
I would say it's each charge, but what I would suggest is you look at it in totality. So if there are 10 offences, I think a £1,000 fine may be inappropriate, but you may say that a couple of £100 is appropriate. So it's not as simple as 1 times 10, but you're looking at it in a little bit of a
we've done it before where we actually ended up with one club. We sent them a charge and it worked out about £600, but we were actually in the end agreed not to do the fine. They just withdrew the team from the league, which is what we really wanted to happen.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Okay, thank you, Alison. That's all from me.
Okay, no problems. I can see Terry's got a hand up again.
It's on maximum fines. So you mentioned about the differences in maximum fines for adults, and if you've got an adult coach in a youth club, do they pay? Is their maximum fine the adult fine, or is it the youth fine?
So the differences between adult football and youth football. So if it's an adult involved in youth football, it would still be £100 maximum.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, is there any differences in circumstances? Say, for example, you've got a adult coach who's assaulted a referee, for example. That sort of thing. That's sort of where that question's come from. So.
That comes through to us at the county, and if it's that kind of, if it's a misconduct breach, so something like that, that's for us to deal with at the county, and we are able to charge adults in youth football at a different rate as if it was a child in youth football.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, no problems. I can't see any new questions in the chat. So unless there's any other issues or questions anybody wants to raise, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to turn the recorder. Oh, Ernie, have you got your hand up? I can see your hand up in real life.
Just a quickie, Alistair.
Yeah.
The latest situation on a player who is eligible. How many games, or is it just the one game that you can go back on to look at docking points, or
you can deduct?
I know it was only one game years and years ago, but
no, you can go back and it can be for multiple games. You can only deduct up to a maximum of 12 points.
But more than one game.
Yes.
And the same with cup competitions.
Yes, you're just running into a little bit of difficulty then as to how far back you can go practically, which and that's where that 28-day thing comes into account. So actually, it's not, you can go back 28 days.
But if he's ineligible before 28 days, then or after 28 days, then you can't take action. It's always been a thorny one, I know.
Yeah, I think there's a degree of practicality when it comes to the cup competition, certainly.
A bit of common sense.
Yeah.
Fine. Thank you.
Okay, no problems. I can see that Alan's got another meeting, so he's had to leave us. So I will draw it to a close there. But thank you very much for joining me this evening. I hope it's been useful. I hope it hasn't been teaching everybody to suck eggs. I hope it's been you've kind of gained some new kind of insight on this. And as always, if there are any questions on this, by all means, please feel free to drop me a line. I will get those resources sent out probably tomorrow morning now with all those template letters, slides from this evening, and we'll get a recording of it put up online as soon as possible.